We're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 8, Chapter 1, the Manus, administrators of the universe. Today's verse is text number 14. Vatagre rashaya karman, ihante karma hetave, ihamano hi purusha, prayoniham prapadyate. Atagre rishaya karman, ihante karma hetave, ihamano hi purusha, prayoniham prapadyate. Atagre rishaya karman, ihante karma hetave, ihamano hi purusha, prayoniham prapadyate. The word for words are ata, therefore, agre, in the beginning, rishaya, all learned rishis, saintly persons, karmani, fruit of activities, ihante, execute, akarma, freedom from fruit of results, hetave, for the purpose of, ihamana, engaging in such activities, he, indeed, purusha, a person, praya, almost always, aniham, liberation from karma, prapadyate, attains. Translation, therefore, to enable people to reach the stage of activities that are not tinged by fruit of results, great saints first engage people in fruit of activities, for unless one begins by performing activities as recommended in the Shastras, one cannot reach the stage of liberation or activities that produce no reactions. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the chapter and read the translations up to this point so that everyone has some context. Text number 1. King Parikshit said, O my Lord, my spiritual master, now I have fully heard from your grace about the dynasty of Swayambhuva Manu, but there are also other Manus, and I want to hear about their dynasties. Kindly describe them to us. O learned Brahmana Shukadeva Goswami, the great learned persons who are completely intelligent describe the activities and appearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead during the various manvantaras. We are very eager to hear about these narrations. Kindly describe them. O learned Brahmana, kindly describe to us whatever activities the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who created this cosmic manifestation, has performed in the past manvantaras, is performing at present, and will perform in the future manvantaras. Shukadeva Goswami said, in the present kalpa, there have already been 6 Manus. I have described to you Swayambhuva Manu and the appearance of many demigods. In this kalpa of Brahma, Swayambhuva is the first Manu. Swayambhuva Manu had 2 daughters named Akuti and Devahuti. From their wombs, the Supreme Personality of Godhead appeared as 2 sons of Yagnamurti and Kapila, respectively. These sons were entrusted with preaching about religion and knowledge. O best of the Kurus, I have already described in the 3rd canto the activities of Kapila, the son of Devahuti. Now I shall describe the activities of Yagyapati, the son of Akuti. Swayambhuva Manu, the husband of Shatarupa, was by nature not at all attached to enjoyment of the senses. Thus he gave up his kingdom of sense enjoyment and entered the forest with his wife to practice austerities. O Sayanaparat, after Swayambhuva Manu had thus entered the forest with his wife, he stood on one leg on the bank of the river Sunanda. In this way, with only one leg touching the earth, he performed great austerities for 100 years. While performing these austerities, he spoke as follows. Lord Manu said, the Supreme Living Being has created this material world of animation. It is not that he was created by this material world. When everything is silent, the Supreme Being stays awake as a witness. The living entity does not know him, but he knows everything. Within this universe, the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his supersoul feature is present everywhere. wherever there are animate or inanimate beings. Therefore, one should accept only that which is allotted to him. One should not desire to infringe upon the properties of others. You'll notice this verse number 10, Atma vasyan idam svishvam yat kinchij jagatyam jagat tena tyaktena bunjita magridha kasasudhanam. Sound familiar?
Yes.
Yes. And so actually in the Sri Upanishad that we read, and there's a commentary, there's a book that's been translated, I think, by Banu Maharaj with the commentary there, and it points out that the speaker of the prayers in Sri Upanishad is Manu. And as Srivas Pandit Prabhu pointed out to me the other day when we were reading this chapter, that this verse is parallel with Isavasamidam Sarvam. And so the Sri Upanishad, when we're chanting it, we can now see the context that it's Manu. He's gone to the forest to perform austerities in the last stage of his life, and all his realizations are pouring out into that Shastra. Text number, translation. Within this universe, the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his super soul feature is present everywhere, wherever there are animate or inanimate beings. Therefore, one should accept only that which is allotted to him. One should not desire to infringe upon the property of others. Text 11. Although the Supreme Personality of Godhead constantly watches the activities of the world, no one sees him. However, one should not think that because no one sees him, he does not see, for his power is to see is never diminished. Therefore, everyone should worship the super soul, who always stays with the individual soul as a friend. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has no beginning, no end, and no middle, nor does he belong to a particular person or nation. He has no inside or outside. The dualities found within this material world, such as beginning and end, mine and theirs, are all absent from the personality of the Supreme Lord. The universe which emanates from him is another feature of the Lord. Therefore, the Supreme Lord is the ultimate truth, and he is complete in greatness. 13. The entire cosmic manifestation is the body of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth, who has millions of names and unlimited potencies. He is self-effulgent, unborn, and changeless. He is the beginning of everything, but he has no beginning. Because he has created this cosmic manifestation by his external energy, the universe appears to be created, maintained, and annihilated by him. Nonetheless, he remains inactive in his spiritual energy and is untouched by the activities of the material energy. And today's verse, Atagre Rishaya Karaman, Ihante Karma Hetave, Ihamano Hi Purusha Prayo Niham Prapadyate. Therefore, to enable people to reach the stage of activities that are not tinged by fruitive results, great saints first engage people in fruitive activities, for unless one begins by performing activities as recommended in the Shastras, one cannot reach the stage of liberation or activities that produce no reactions. Srila Prabhupada's purport. In Bhagavad Gita 3:9, Lord Krishna advises, Jagnartat karmano nyatra loko yam karma bandhana. Work done as a sacrifice for Vishnu has to be performed, otherwise work binds one to this material world. Generally, everyone is attracted to hard labor for becoming happy in this material world. But although various activities are going on all over the world simply for the sake of happiness, unfortunately, only problems are being created from such fruitive activities. Therefore, it is advised that active persons engage in activities of Krishna consciousness, which are called yajna, because then they will gradually come to the platform of devotional service. Yajna means Lord Vishnu, the Yajna Purusha, the enjoyer of all sacrifices. Bhuktaram Yagyatapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is actually the enjoyer, and therefore, if we begin our activities for his satisfaction, we will gradually lose our taste for material activities. Sutta Goswami declared to the great assembly of sages at Naimisharanya, Ata Pumbir Dvija Shreshta Varnashrama Vibhagasha Swanustista Siddharmasya Samsiddhir Haritoshadam. O best among the twice born, it is concluded that the highest perfection one can achieve by discharging his prescribed duties, dharma, according to caste divisions and order of life, is to please the Lord Hari. That's from Bhagavatam 1-13. According to Vedic principles, everyone must act according to his classification as Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, Brahmachari, Grahastha, Vanaprastha, or Sannyasi. Everyone should progress toward perfection by acting in such a way that Krishna will be pleased. Samsiddhir Haritoshanam. One cannot please Krishna by sitting idly. One must act according to the directions of the spiritual master for the sake of pleasing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then one will gradually come to the stage of pure devotional service, as confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.12. Naishkarmyam apyachuta bhavavarjitam nashobhate jnanam alam niranjanam. Knowledge of self-realization, even though freed from all material affinity, does not look well if devoid of a conception of the infallible God. Gyanis recommend that one adopt Naishkarmya by not doing anything, but simply meditating and thinking of Brahman. But this is impossible unless one realizes Parabrahman, Krishna. If there is no Krishna consciousness, any kind of activity, be it philanthropic, political, or social, simply causes karma bandhana, bondage to material work. As long as one is entangled in karma bandhana, one must accept different types of bodies that spoil the human form of facility. Therefore, in Bhagavad Gita 6.3, karma yoga is recommended. Arurikshor manir yogam karma karanamuchite yoga rudhasitasyaiva shama karanamuchite. For one who is a neophyte in the yoga system, work is said to be the means. And for one who has already attained to yoga, cessation of all material activities is said to be the means. Nonetheless, karmendriyani samyamya aste manasasmaran indriyartan vimudhatma nitya charasa uchite. One who restrains the senses and organs of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. Bhagavad Gita 3.6. Nice palindrome there. The verse before that was 6.3, and here we are at 3.6. Just so you can remember the two in tandem. One should act for Krishna very seriously in order to become fully Krishna conscious, and should not sit down to imitate such great personalities as Haridas Thakur. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati condemned such imitation. He said, Dushtamana tumi kishera Vaishnava, pratishtara tare nirajanera ghare, tava hari nam kebala kaitaba. My dear mind, what kind of devotee are you? Simply for cheap adoration, you sit in a solitary place and pretend to chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, but this is all cheating. Recently at Mayapur, an African devotee wanted to imitate Haridas Thakur, but after 15 days, he became restless and went away. Do not suddenly try to imitate Haridas Thakur. Engage yourself in Krishna conscious activities, and gradually you will come to the stage of liberation. Muktir hitva yata rupam swarupena vyavastiti. Atagre rishaya karman. Ata, therefore, agre, in the beginning, rishaya, all the rishis, karman, fruit of activities. Therefore, in the beginning, all the rishis, fruit of activities, ihante, akarma, freedom from fruit of results, hetave, for the purpose of, ihamana, engaging in such activities. He, certainly, purusha, a person, praya, almost always, aniham, liberation from karma, prapadyate, attains, Therefore, to enable people to reach the stage of activities that are not tinged by fruitive results, great saints first engage people in fruitive activities, for unless one begins by performing activities as recommended in the Shastras, one cannot reach the stage of liberation or activities that produce no reactions. Yes, so it's not so easy to get out of the bodily condition of life, because a conditioned soul has been in that situation since a time immemorial. It means anadi karma. We can't trace it out how long ago it was. And nor do the Shastras try to trace it out, nor do the Acharyas try to trace it out either. Some will mention, as does Bhaktivinoda Thakur in Jaiva Dharma, that when one achieves Chit Samadhi, or one becomes disengaged from the subtle and gross body and sees oneself as an eternal spiritual being, and thus is not affected by the context of time, then one can understand. But one can understand one's proclivity to be in the material world by studying one's own psychology and noticing an unwillingness to serve God, and a tendency to try to enjoy the material nature, which is what the Shastra, the Acharyas, and Srila Prabhupada has presented again and again, is the cause for being in a material body in the first place. Be that as it may, once a person is embodied, there's a circle of karma, which is created by one's interaction with the external world through the agency of the mind and the intelligence. The buddhi, or the intelligence, is the closest thing to us. In fact, at the end of the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna describes Indriyani priyanyahur indriyebhya paramaraha manasastu parabhudir yobude paratastu saha. That there's a hierarchy starting with the senses. Above the senses is a more subtle entity called the mind, which is the clearinghouse for all the impulses that come in through the senses. And the mind then presents those images, accepting and rejecting them, to the buddhi, or the intelligence, where there's vivek, or a sense of discrimination of which things to execute. And those are passed up from the buddhi into the purusha, or the soul. And actually, maybe just if I ask for a verse, then bring it up. Otherwise, don't do it automatically, because then.
Sorry, Maharaj.
No, that's okay. So there's this hierarchy, and in the next verse, Krishna says, "Evam buddhi param buddva samstabhyatmanamatmana jahi shatram mahabaho kamarupam durasadam." He says that it's possible for the Purusha to rise above the lower influences of the senses, the mind, and the intellect that become contaminated by the 3 modes of material nature. And he does that by purification and by deliberate spiritual intelligence. And then one can discern, using one's intellect, which in the materially conditioned stage of life contemplates how to exploit the material energy in a more efficient way. In fact, this is what universities are about mostly. There's no department there for discerning the difference between matter and spirit. However, they are especially expert at showing us how to use the intellect to exploit material nature more efficiently. And let's go deeper into physics, into electronics, and psychology in such a way that we can find happiness in the material world. But yoga is different. it's using the intellect in such a way that it can see the difference between itself or the soul can see the difference between itself and the intellect. So this is called deliberate spiritual intelligence, and that's what Krishna recommends. So that contemplative activity of being able to do that is not so easy, because there are so many conditionings in the mind that come from my interaction with the modes of material nature. Actually, the mind is filled with the various modes of material nature, sattva, rajas, and tamas. And as Krishna describes in the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, there's a way that the modes are always mixing. So you never get pure sattva or pure rajas or pure tamas, but there's always mixtures of them. And sometimes one is prominent and then another becomes prominent, but they're always combining and mixing different combinations and permutations. And this is compared by one Vaishnava commentator as like the haritaki fruit. In India, there's the haritaki fruit, and the haritaki fruit, according to Ayurveda, has all the different tastes. And so in a similar way, the mind has all the tastes of the different combinations and permutations of the modes of material nature. And this is something Rishabhadeva describes in his teachings to his son, Parabhavas Tavara Bodha Jato, that one takes birth again and again because of this mixture of the modes of material nature. Therefore, one shouldn't engage oneself again now that one has the material body. That verse, would you please bring up, Shraddha? Parabhavas Tavara Bodha Jato. I believe it's 5:2 or 3. Parabhavas Tavara Bodha Jato.
It won't be in 5.
It's a Rishabhadeva's teachings, 5th canto.
Yeah, it'll be 5, but it's not showing. 2 is not showing up. That one. Let me see.
It's 555.
Thank you. 555. Parabhavas Tavara Bodha Jato.
Thank you. Bringing up. Sharing it now.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So Parabhava means defeat or misery, and Tavat means as long as. Abodha Jato, produced of ignorance. Yavan, as long as. So Parabhava, Abodha Jato, there will be defeat as long as one's in contact with the lower modes of material nature. Yava na jignasa atmatatvam, and one doesn't inquire about the truth of the self. This is deliberate spiritual intelligence. Yavat kriyas tavat idam manovai, and as long as fruit of activities are there within the mind. Karmatmakam yena sharira bandhaha. Karmatmaka means absorbed in fruit of activities or colored by fruit of activities. Then one has to take another material body. So Vyasa explains that there's a way in which when we leave the present material body, there's all of our karma comes as one wave. Just like if you're at the beach and a huge wave comes all of a sudden. This happens sometimes in what we call tsunamis. The wave, you can see it coming from a long way away, and it comes and it sweeps away everybody. The town, the villages, all the animals, all the people, all the cars. They happen sometimes in Japan. You can watch, and it looks like a little play area that just got flooded, and everything's just floating away. Or sometimes we get out here in California these sleeper waves that everything looks kind of calm, and then a huge wave comes and it just pulls people off the cliffs. So you have to be careful out there. So Vyasadeva says that at the time of death, then a wave, which is comprised of all our karmas that we've created through our interaction with the modes of material nature through the agency of the mind, they come to bear at that time. And karmana daiva netrena jantur deho papate striya pravishta udanam punso reta kanashraya. There's a way in which there's a decision made. It's very automatic, actually. There are personalities involved whose intelligence is practically omniscient. Like Yamaraj is empowered by Krishna to have this omnisciency in order to discern what will be the best situation for the living entity at the time of death. But in any case, it looks mechanical. Everything comes together at one time like a wave of karma, and it simply pulls us into the next situation. So Rishabhadev here is warning his sons, Parabhavas tavada bhudajato, yamana jignasata atma tattvam, tavat kriya manas idam manovai karmatmaka yena sharira bandhaha. As long as you're not using your intelligence to separate yourself from the mind, which is affected by the modes of material nature, then you're engaged in karmatmaka, which means you're engaging through the agency of the mind and with the modes of material nature in the material world. And that means sharira bandha, means more bondage in the material world. You'll be pulled in. So how does one become freed from this? So Krishna starts off in the Bhagavad Gita by describing the paths of karma in chapter 3, and then jnana in chapter 4. And he describes therein that great kings like Janak, they showed people the path of working for the Lord through performing sacrifices, because most people are not able to sit down and contemplate what's the difference between the mind and the self. And therefore, they have to engage their senses in practical ways. And in this purport, Prabhupada mentions the varnashrama, that everyone has a predisposition to work in a certain way, to think in a certain way, certain capacities for thinking and working. And this comes as because of the combination of the modes of material nature one is acquired through association in one's last life and has been accommodated for in this life in a particular kind of body. And therefore, one has to be engaged according to those propensities so that one can gradually become freed from the influence of the three modes of material nature. And how is that done? It's done through the process of yajna. So one can work as one's predisposed to do. Everyone needs to work. Nobody likes to be sheltered at home. Everyone wants to be out doing their thing and working in a certain way and engaging the senses. But Krishna says that if you add yajna, or the sense that I'm doing this for the Supreme, then that activity, even if it's slightly materially motivated, if there's that understanding that ultimately I'm doing this for God, it'll become gradually purifying to the personality, to the person who's performing the work. And in the Vedas, there are certain kinds of fruitive activities that offer rewards, material rewards, that say if you do this kind of sacrifice, then you're going to get a better position in the material world. And some people are already attached to getting something here in the material world. And therefore, if you don't give them the opportunity to do it in conjunction with the Shastra, or as a instruction from the Shastra, then they'll just try on their own. So the Shastra then says, work like this, perform these kinds of sacrifices, and then you'll be elevated. And as one does that, there's a way in which one starts to develop faith in the Shastra. And then through good association, one can start to develop a sense for performing activities that are more in line with the desires of the personality of Godhead. And one gradually comes from this point of performing karma to karma yoga, and then gradually into bhakti yoga. Interestingly, in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna describes the path of yoga or meditation, he mentions that for those who are starting off, the path of work is recommended, because people can't sit down and meditate if their mind is too agitated. In fact, there's prerequisites, even in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, for somebody to be able to meditate, and that's the yams and the niyams. You have to be properly situated, not lying, not stealing. You have to control your senses and perform some tapasya before you can settle down the interior part of your mind. And there are these impulses that come from a previous association with modes of material nature. And Patanjali says that these are very difficult to overcome unless you perform Kriya Yoga, which is very much, it's almost synonymous with Karma Yoga, which includes using your senses in working for God, and also doing japa, reading scriptures and things like that, before you can actually weaken the impulses that are there within your mind. So you can sit down and discriminate between matter and spirit and see the difference between yourself and your body. So that's being recommended here, or what I mean by that is, as Prabhupada says, therefore it is advised that active persons engage in activities of Krishna consciousness, which are called yajna, because then they will gradually come to the platform of devotional service. So in general, we have to find the ways that we can keep our senses engaged in practical ways. Prabhupada mentions later on here that by spreading Krishna consciousness and engaging in the process of the Sankirtan movement, one's senses become purified. And also, as we teach Krishna consciousness to others, we have to give practical ways that they can engage their senses in acts of sacrifice that are meaningful to them, because not everybody can simply jump into the process of devotional service. It's not so easy for some people. And therefore, the Shastra and the Acharyas give a gradual way to step in and begin to make advancement. Now we'll take a few reflections or questions to expand the conversation.
Guru Maharaj, Dandavat Pranam, Radha Kripadas.
Hare Krishna, Radha Kripa Prabhu.
Maharaj, when you mentioned that we need to identify not with mind and the self, who is that? Is that the living entity or the soul? Sorry, I couldn't get that proper. I couldn't understand that one. Can you just please mention who should do that? Is that me means as a soul or as a living entity? Because I am just identifying myself. I'm not a mind, and self. Is that self is soul? Sorry, I just got a bit confused.
Yes, the self is the soul. It's called,
self is the soul. Okay.
Called the Atma or the Purusha. It means you're a person, and you have consciousness. The consciousness of the Atma has nothing to do with matter. It's constant, steady, eternal. It never diminishes. And in final analysis, our engagement with matter is rather odd, because we actually have nothing to do with material nature at all. However, when we become connected to it, there's a way in which we're accommodated with a subtle and gross body, and the subtle body, especially the buddhi or the intelligence, is the closest thing to us. That's a covering that's immediate to the soul or the living entity or the Purusha. They're all the same thing. And then when our consciousness, which is full of light, is reflected on the buddhi, and we look at the buddhi with our reflection in it, we assume that that's us. and similarly with the mind, which is also a very subtle form of prakriti. There's only two things in this world, ultimately, according to Sankhya, and that's the Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha is the living entity, and the Prakriti means the material nature, and the two are quite different. However, the living entity becomes involved with Prakriti, and then through looking at the world through the medium of the mind that's illuminated by the effulgence of the Purusha, it becomes that mind and the buddhi become illuminated by the light of the soul, and then the living entity, who's actually the seer, becomes absorbed in that effulgent mind and thinks this is me, and becomes absorbed in the world of the mind. And the mind is affected by the three modes of material nature, and therefore the living entity is absorbed in this world of the mind, which is controlled by the modes of material nature. It appears as if the world's turning, but only the mind is turning because of the impulses that are coming into the mind called vrittis. Vritti means really to turn. So the mind's always turning, it's always seeing things. And so when one is in illusion, one feels that I am the mind and I am the situation of my life that's going on right now, and has a very deep fear, for instance, of death, clinging to the material body. It's one of the obstacles that Krishna mentions in knowledge. He said one should see, the superfluous nature of birth and death, and not become overwhelmed by it. But that's the situation when one's in bondage, being attached and thinking, I am this body, I am this mind, I am the life situation that's going on around me, and so forth. But through discrimination, and really, if those who are become enlightened in spiritual knowledge start to understand that the material world's not a place of enjoyment. Krishna calls it the dukkhalayam. It means a place of misery. And that misery, we're hearing about from Rishabhadev, it's samsara, it's not pleasant. We're dragged down again and again and put in different kinds of bodies. And these are born from the kleshas, or the miseries themselves that are embedded in our mind because of our association with Prakriti. So one can actually, become disconnected from that and see the difference between the body and the self. So through bhakti, our process of bhakti yoga, Sudha Goswami says, Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janaya Yashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayura Haitukam. When you engage in activities of bhakti yoga, then naturally you get knowledge, which means a perspective of seeing the difference between your body and yourself, and vairagya, a sense of detachment from Prakriti. Is there another question, or?
Oh, I have a question.
Yes.
Go ahead, Sadhu.
Yeah. Haribo Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Sadhu Vrindavan.
So, the procrastinating is a really big problem for me, because as we know, the mind is always likes to, if you don't train it properly, the mind will always pull you towards sense gratification. So like if I say to my mind, today I'm going to read, I don't know, Bhagavad Gita, Brihad Bhagavatam for 2 hours at 11:30 a.m. And then at 11:30 a.m. suddenly my friends call me, and they call me to play, and then I start playing with them, and I totally forget about what that I'm gonna read. And then for the whole day, I totally forget that I'm gonna read Brihad Bhagavatam today, and then then I never read it. So how do we stop procrastinating from how do we keep our mind focused on the task that is given to us?
What a good question. Thank you very much for asking that. That's very practical. So there are a couple of techniques that can be very helpful for procrastination, and especially for setting goals. So you're a progressive person. You like to take up tasks that improve yourself, better yourself in devotional service, and Madanga and reading, all these types of things. So now what you mentioned was reading Brihat Bhagavatamrita for 2 hours. That's a tall order, 2 hours. So there's a philosophy in Japan that I learned many years ago that has to do with this way in which to take consistency over volume. And translated into English, it's called mini habits. So it's just like homeopathy. In homeopathy, you take the most diluted of the particular medicine that you're putting into the pill. It's practically just like one molecule in the whole thing. The subtleness of it has some kind of effect, apparently, although I know very little about homeopathy. But that's the idea. I heard Prabhupada talking about it once. And the same idea is there. Instead of saying, I'm going to do 2 hours of Brihat Bhagavatamrita, you might say something more like, I'm going to do 2 minutes of Brihat Bhagavatamrita every day. Then what your mind will say is, that's nothing. Anybody could do that. That's practically nothing. It's like the homeopathy. It's like there's nothing in this. And so then you could just say, okay, well, I could do that. Now just do your 2 minutes. And what happens is you'll notice that sometimes you'll read more than 2 minutes. You'll get absorbed and you'll say, oh, okay, I'll read 20 minutes. And then sometimes you'll even be hanging out for 2 hours. And someone will say, come on, let's go play. And you say, yeah, I'm just finishing my 2 minutes here. So breaking down habits into mini habits is a much easier way to do it. Otherwise, it's hard to look at. I'm always amazed. You look at a book and it always looks like a lot to read, right? Especially the Brihat Bhagavatamrita. I'm going to get one because it's more impressive when you look at how thick it is. That's thick, right? Can you see it? Yeah. So now I want you all to notice how thin one page of a book is. You see that? How thin is that? So thin that you think like, I could never get from here to here if the pages are so thin. How am I ever going to get there? But there's a miracle that happens. When you take some kind of a vow to read a certain number of pages, even if it's 2 pages, and you keep moving them, a miracle happens, the days go by, and after a while you look and you go like, how did I get halfway through? And then you can go another halfway through by doing the same project. There was a Greek philosopher named Zeno who gave an imponderable, which was about how you can never get anywhere because you always have to go halfway before you go all the way. And there's an infinite number of halfway points. And he conceived some race between a tortoise and some other animal. In any case, we do find that by moving 1 page at a time, you will get there. But start smaller. And there's another trick to overcoming procrastination. The brain really seeks pleasure. We seek pleasure. And we have, in the language of yoga, samskars, or impressions of pleasurable things we've done in the past, and we gravitate towards those. And actually in modern medical science, there's a description, don't touch your face. There's a description of how when we engage in certain activities that stimulate the pleasure area of our brain, we get a chemical reaction, a chemical called dopamine. It's like a kind of it's a feel-good drug that the body naturally produces when we do certain activities. So there have been experiments with rats, and they put little electrodes on their little brains, and then they gave them that they were connected to the part of their brain that would stimulate dopamine, which would give them a feeling of happiness. And then they gave them 2 levers. And one lever, every time they pushed the lever, then they would stimulate the brain and they would get dopamine. And so then, as any addictive behavior, they start pushing the lever over and over and over and over again. They wouldn't stop for anything, which reminds us of people who are looking at, for instance, a telephone with images on it, social media, and it's almost like the rat pushing the lever over and over and over and over again. The experiments showed that when they were stimulated by dopamine, they only wanted to get that again and again. They didn't, even food wasn't interesting to them. If they put food nearby them, they wouldn't even go for it. They'd eat if you put it like right next to their mouth. But they were showing through this experiment that human beings are motivated by getting a sense of happiness or pleasure. So there's ways in which we can get addicted to certain activities that give us that stimulation right away, but they may not be very progressive activities or ultimately very satisfying. For instance, some people play video games and they get addicted to it because it spikes the brain. Other people are addicted to pornography, which is a huge epidemic in the world. And that overstimulates the brain in such a way it produces some kind of artificial pleasure in the brain, and people can't stop doing it. So there's this, what should one do? There's a way in which we have to retrain our brain so that, for instance, if you decide that you're going to do other kinds of activity, first of all, you have to do a dopamine detox. Take a day when you don't stimulate your brain with any of the ways that you're compulsively inclined to do it now. Like, for instance, if you find yourself ever wasting time looking at a screen, then take one day when you don't look at any screens. And you might feel kind of bored, but that's an okay thing to feel bored. Get that out of your system. And it's just like an example, you know, if people have a lot of money and they go to fancy restaurants every day and they eat a big fancy meal, after a while that becomes the new normal. And if you give them a bowl of oatmeal, they'll say like, ew, I don't want to eat that. But if somebody was starving in the desert and then you gave them a bowl of not desert, maybe in the forest, and then you gave them a bowl of oatmeal, they'd think it was nectar. So when we allow our brains to get overstimulated in certain unproductive ways, and I'm not saying playing is necessarily that, you know, it's good for kids to play, but the fact is that we have to decide, this is also deliberate spiritual intelligence, we have to decide by hearing from the Shastra, what is the best way to get that kind of pleasure in our brain, and then do those things first, and arrange your life so that you do those kind of things first. For instance, reading Shastra and doing your chanting, even getting substantive work done that you need to do and not just leaving it till the last part of the day and frittering away the rest of the day with things that just feel good. Because then you can start getting a sense of happiness that comes from doing the right thing. And that takes a little training so that you can do that. So you have to plan ahead and then write down the activities that you're going to do first and do them in small quantities to start with so that you start developing new habit. And then you can, the brain has what's called plasticity, which means it can be reformed at any time. Of course, when people's brains become very addicted to certain kinds of sense gratification, it takes a while for the brain to come back to its normal state. So we have to be careful and deal with it properly. Any other questions or reflections?
Yeah, Maharaj, there are a couple of reflections on the chat, on the Zoom chat, as well as
Okay.
on Facebook, and a few questions also, reflections and questions.
Okay.
There's one from Shraddha and Lekha. That's the first one to look at.
Okay, Shraddha and Lekha, Hare Krishna. The process of getting rid of impulses is to perform devotional service. But what if I'm getting impulses while performing devotional service? What is the remedy to this? Well, in the beginning, obviously, we're going to get these impulses while we're performing devotional service. But this is why in the beginning, when we're practicing devotional service, it's called Vaidhi. Vaidhi means rules and regulations. And you have to do it anyway. Just like when the doctor says, you're going to have to stop drinking grapefruit juice for the next 2 weeks in order to get cured. And then, you know, when you're used to drinking grapefruit juice, and then you just follow the doctor and say that I'm not going to do it, even though the impulse is there. So in the beginning, we have to be regulated. And as Prabhupada says, do it as like you're in the military. That's just the way it is. And then later on, you'll start to develop your own impetus. So in the beginning, there's this rules and regulations. But it's natural. The impulses are there until you get a higher taste. And from Mayank, okay, yes, Shraddha?
I was saying it's a reflection from my end.
Okay, reflection from Mayank, from 429.66. O King, all good fortune unto you. The mind is the cause of the living entities attaining a certain type of body in accordance with his association with material nature. According to one's mental composition, one can understand what the living entity was in his past life, as well as what kind of body he will have in the future. Thus, the mind indicates the past and future bodies. Yes. In fact, Patanjali, in one of the chapters in the Yoga Sutras, talks about siddhis, or the ways in which one can develop mystic powers. And one of the mystic powers is to be able to see your past lives. And the way that one achieves that through a state of meditation is by very minutely observing the samskars, or the impressions that are already there in the brain. And that means in a very focused way through the meditation, one can actually see one's past lives. They're written there. The Devavrata, the false ego, is so imperceptible and subtle, and it seems as long as we are not aware of our eternal spiritual identity, we can very easily be pulled into the tendencies of the false ego, which pulls us away from the intelligence, saying you are an eternal servant of Krishna. It feels like an unending cycle of self-sabotage. How do we overcome this false ego and develop more awareness and confidence of our identity as a servant of Krishna? So one of the ways is by practicing humility. And this is something that becomes noticeable to somebody who's doing sadhana, by practicing giving respect to others without expecting any respect in return. So there's a kind of starvation of the ego. You don't feed it, and give in to all kinds of ways in which you're putting yourself forward. And you can start to notice the reactions. And then also you can start to notice that you're getting your happiness from a different level, not from simply stimulating your sense of false ego. This is, Krishna says in the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Nirmana, Moha Jita Sangha Dosha. Nirman, he said, practice not being the center, not putting yourself forward, and see what happens. And then you'll start to develop a little more what's called vivek, or discrimination, to see that I'm actually not getting anything from my false ego. It's a false sense. And from any artificial sense that I have, I don't actually get what I'm looking for. And also, as mentioned in the Bhagavatam, in the Bhagavad Gita, all other shastras that deal with yoga psychology, you only actually get real happiness when you know the truth. And the truth is that you're the Purusha, and you're part and parcel of Krishna, and you have nothing to do with the material world. So the more you can glimpse that through your practice and see that actually I'm a spiritual entity, I'm part and parcel of Krishna, then that higher taste helps us to really not want to engage the false ego at all, or to be very wary of it. Atulya Harinam Prabhu, Delaware Ki Jai. When we enjoy or suffer, who is actually experiencing the suffering or happiness? Is the spirit soul, or the body, or the false ego or mind? For example, when someone pinches me, I feel the pain. The experience of pain is at the bodily level. However, if we are not the body in real sense, this body is dead. How is the experience calculated at a spiritual level? Well, this is described by Maitreya Rishi to Vidura in the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. There are other technical explanations given in various places, but this one is an example that everyone can relate to, and that is a dream. When we're in a dream, we may experience some pleasure, or we may experience some great distress. And it's, in one sense, it's actually happening to me because I'm making a mistake. And you can't say that I'm not suffering in some way, but it's a mistaken kind of happiness, and it's not real. And he gives the example, does Maitreya, that one might see one's head cut off in a dream. So someone cuts your head off and then says, here you go. And you're watching your head cut off, and then you're holding your head in your hands, and then you're crying like, wow, my head's cut off. But that doesn't make any sense, because the fact is that you can't see when your head's cut off, what to speak of cry and so forth. And so when you wake up, then you see, oh, this was some kind of a conjuring that was going on within the mind. So the soul is the seer, but it is mistakenly engaging in an illusory kind of awareness, which is the modes of nature projected onto the screen of the mind, and is following that movie. Just like you might, when you go in a movie theater, which nobody can now because of COVID-19, but if you sit down in a movie theater and the movie comes on and you're watching, you can be carried away by it. So there's a sense that I'm going here, I'm going there. And all the while, the soul is the same as it ever was. And when the lights come back on in the movie, you notice that the movie was going on and I was okay the whole time. And similarly, when we wake up to our real spiritual nature, we notice I was okay the whole time. In fact, I've always been liberated, as a matter of fact, because I'm part and parcel of the Lord. I'm the same quality as He is. But because I'm tiny, I've been carried away by this material nature, and I've been abhinibheshita, or absorbed in an energy that has nothing to do with me. So ultimately, the soul is the agent, is the actor, but he's watching the wrong movie, actually. And then we have for Radha Venkat Prabhu, he says 8.1.14 sounds similar to this. And we can look at that, 8.1.14. And while you're finding that, I'm going to see, Radha Venkat Prabhu said 3.26, so as not to disrupt the minds of ignorant men attached to the material world. Hey, there's the Haritaki fruit.
Yeah, I was just looking it up, Maharaj.
The Buddhi Bedam Janayad, Ajnanam Karma Sanginam, Joshet Sarvakarmani, Vidvan Yukta Samacharan. And the translation is, so as not to disrupt the minds of ignorant men attached to the furtive results of prescribed duties, a learned person should not induce them to stop work, but rather by working in the spirit of devotion, he should engage them in all sorts of activities for the gradual development of Krishna consciousness. That's it. That's the verse. And he gave us one other verse from 8.1.14.
The one that we are doing.
Oh, that's today's verse. Okay. Then we've got Mukaravinda Prabhu, as a living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. Let's look at that one, and I'll read the purport. It's a short purport, but it's very instructive. Is everyone okay?
Yes, Maharaj.
Krishna, you're okay?
Yes.
Okay. Kadashi Vrat is there. Manish is there.
Okay, in San Jose.
You're good. Okay, okay. Yad artena vina mushya pumsa atma viparyaya pratiyata upadrishtu drashtu swa shiras chedanadika. Oh, this sounds terrible. He's getting his head cut off. Yet, thus, artena, a purpose or meaning, vina, without, amusha, of such a one, pumsa, of the living entity, atma viparyaya, upset about self-identification, pratiyate, so appear, upadrashtu, of the superficial onlooker, swashira, own head, chedana adika, cutting off. Ooh. Translation, the living entity is in distress regarding his self-identity. He has no factual background, like a man who dreams that he sees his head cut off. Purport, a teacher in school once threatened his pupil that he would cut off the pupil's head and hang it on the wall so that the child could see how his head had been cut off. Do they do that at Challenger? The child became frightened and stopped his mischief. I'll probably get sued for that. Similarly, the miseries of the pure soul and the disruption of his self-identification are managed by the external energy of the Lord, which controls those mischievous living entities who want to go against the will of the Lord. Actually, there is no bondage or misery for the living entity, nor does he ever lose his pure knowledge. In his pure consciousness, when he thinks a little seriously about his position, he can understand that he is eternally subordinate to the mercy of the Supreme, and that his attempt to become one with the Supreme Lord is a false illusion. Life after life, the living entity falsely tries to lord it over material nature and become the lord of the material world, but there is no tangible result. At last, when frustrated, he gives up his material activities and tries to become one with the Lord and speculate with much jugglery of words without success. These activities are performed under the dictation of the illusory energy. The experience is compared to the experience of one's having his head cut off in a dream. The man whose head has been cut off also sees that his head has been cut off. If a person's head is severed, he loses his power to see. Therefore, if a man sees that his head has been cut off, it means that he thinks like that in hallucination. Similarly, a living entity is eternally subordinate to the Supreme Lord, and he has this knowledge with him. But artificially, he thinks that he is God himself, and that although he is God, he has lost his knowledge due to Maya. This conception has no meaning, just as there is no meaning to seeing one's head being cut off. This is the process by which knowledge is covered. And because this artificial rebellious condition of the living entity gives him all troubles, it is to be understood that he should take to his normal life as a devotee of the Lord and be relieved from the misconception of being God. The so-called liberation of thinking oneself God is the last reaction of avidya, by which the living entity is entrapped. The conclusion is that a living entity deprived of eternal transcendental service to the Lord becomes illusion in many ways. Even in his conditional life, he is the eternal servant of the Lord. His servitude under the spell of illusory energy, Maya, is also a manifestation of his eternal condition of service. Because he has rebelled against the service of the Lord, he is therefore put in the service of Maya. He is still serving, but in a perverted manner. When he wants to get out of service under material bondage, he next desires to become one with the Lord. This is another illusion. The best course, therefore, is to surrender unto the Lord and thus get rid of the illusory Maya for good, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Daivahi yesha gunamayi mama maya duratya mameva ye prapajante mayametam tarantite. So that's the answer to that question. So just, was there anything else? From Munisha. Yeah, thank you for giving us that verse, Mukarvan. And then Monisha said, you mentioned that there is a wave of karma that comes all at the same time. If I understand correctly, from that same wave, there will be actions and reactions, and again, the cycle repeats. How can we get out of the cycle? Also, we can never get one pure mode, as you had explained. The modes are mixed. So how do we develop the pure feeling to love Krishna? Yes, so this is the process of Krishna consciousness, to become free altogether from the modes of material nature. That there are different processes through these different Vedic darshans. You know, there's Sankhya philosophy that describe, there's Prakriti and Purusha, and then there's Nyaya philosophy, there's Vaisesika philosophy, there's yoga, and all of them ultimately have this idea that the soul is suffering in the material world. So they have different ideas of what the soul is. But in Vedanta, by Veda Vyas, we understand that the soul is the eternal part and parcel of Krishna, and that because of mistakenly identifying with the material body and mind since the time immemorial, he's suffering. So the way to get out of that suffering is to turn one's attention back to Krishna. This is described, Lord Chaitanya gave this verse, and it was spoken by one of the Yogendras in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Payam dvitiya abhinibesha tasyad, ishad apetasya viparya yosmiti, tanmayat buddha abhajit tam bhaktyayika yesham guru devatatma. He said that Havi Yogendra, that we're suffering because of being absorbed in that which is not Krishna. We are absorbed in something we think isn't Krishna. Everything's part of Krishna. We're part of Krishna, but we get in a reversed condition of life, and we start thinking that I'm separate from Krishna and I'm my body, and then fear arises because I think that I'm going to die. And I think that I'm a separate enjoyer. And so then he says in fact, the Lord Chaitanya, commenting on the verse, says that he becomes a competitor to God. Because God's eternal servant becomes a competitor. So what's the solution? Tanmayat Buddha abhajat tam, you change your attitude and get a new attitude. And that is that I am a servant of Krishna. And then you turn your attention towards Krishna through Guru. He says, Bhaktyayika yesham Guru Devatatma. See the representative and give your service to the parampara, how to become connected to Krishna. And in that way, it's a simple thing. You turn your attention back to Krishna. Just like Prabhupada solved the problem in the last purport. At the end, he said, Daivahi yesha gunamayi mama maya duratya mameva ye prapadyante mayame tam tarantite. So you're in trouble. You're stuck in this illusory energy. What do? Surrender to Krishna. Surrender to Krishna. And how do you do that? Follow the Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. Find out how to get out of it. You got to get a good attorney who tells you, here's what you do. Here's how to amend your life through the process of following devotional service. And then by the mercy of the Lord, Maya gives up. You know, when Maya sees the devotees engaging in devotional service, she gives us up. So, all right, you can go. You're free. And go away. So we practice bhakti by surrendering to Krishna through the process of devotional service, beginning with Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam. And by that process, Maya releases us, and simultaneously we become more and more attached to Krishna. And those modes of material nature cannot stand in front of Krishna. As we continue to associate with Krishna, Krishna Surya Sama Maya Haya Andakar. You know, where there's Krishna, there's no darkness. And where there's no Krishna, there's only darkness. So if you stay in association with Krishna by chanting Hare Krishna, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, serving the devotees, then by Krishna's powerful purifying effect, the modes of material nature will diminish. You know all the verses, right? Shushu Shro Shodanasya, Shinvatam Swakata Krishna, Nashtaprayashu Badrishu, Tadarajas Tamo Baba. It says that the modes will be eliminated by the process of hearing about Krishna and doing devotional service. I just make another point, and that is that those who become sensitized to the fact that I'm a soul, I'm actually, in a material body that's not me, become very sensitive to how they move about the material world. This is a very interesting point I read yesterday in my study of the Yoga Sutras, because there was an analogy that Vyasadeva gives in one of the sutras. And he said that a yogi is aware of the pain that's inherent in pleasure of the material world. And so he says that chlada, or pleasure, is practically, it's particularly insidious. Can you look up the word insidious?
Sure, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Yeah. Should I spell out?
Yeah, just tell the definition.
Definition. So it's an adjective, which means proceeding in a gradual, subtle way, but with harmful effects.
Ah. And where does it come from?
The origin of insidious, okay. It doesn't give the origins here.
Okay. So gradual and subtle, and it takes us over. So yogis become aware that chlada is particularly insidious, because we think, oh, I'm enjoying, but actually because of that, I become really attached to that idea that I can enjoy, and then I suffer more. Whereas, yes?
Yeah, I was saying that I found the origin also, and it's very interesting origin, because it says it's from Latin, which is insidiosus, which means cunning, and from insidiae, and from insidiae, which is ambush or trick.
Ooh.
And from insidere, which is lie in wait for.
So we get ambushed, tricked by this idea that there's some pleasure in the material world. Yogis become very sensitized because of what we were just hearing about. Parabhavas, tavata, bodha, jato. If my mind's colored by this idea that I can enjoy the material world, so they're particularly careful about where they move in the world. Look at Judd Barrett, how aware he was, and how he moved about. He didn't want to get involved again. And whereas on the other side, dukkha, the misery, is actually a little bit purifying, because from dukkha we get frustration, which actually helps us. So if you feel frustrated for any reason, you should feel yourself fortunate. So here's the analogy he gives. He says a person who becomes refined in understanding how the material world works and what our situation is in it becomes very sensitive. How sensitive? As sensitive as an eyeball. Now, when I first heard that, I said, what? And then he goes on to explain that if you put a tiny little filament on your eyeball, you'll be very uncomfortable. If you put that little filament anywhere else on your body, you won't even feel it. But on your eyeball, it's so sensitive that you'll be trying to get it out right away. So he said those who are advancing in the process of spiritual consciousness, they become as sensitive as an eyeball to the fact that they're being exposed to various modes of nature, and they're very careful about that. So the yogi is aware of the pain that's inherent in pleasure. So in these moments that are advertised, you see billboards, television things like, oh yes, this is what we're looking for, running on the beach, really happy. All you have to do is smoke cigarettes and this, or drink Coca-Cola. The yogi is very aware that this is an ambush, this is a fake out, and that inherent in that so-called pleasure is pain at the end of it. So she's careful to move about the world in such a way as not to become more and more entangled. So the practical way of doing that is to dedicate one's activities to Krishna. And this is by Narada, describes this like taking a thorn out with a thorn. We have these tendencies to act in the material world in ways that entangle us. So we act all the same, but we dedicate it to Krishna. So activity is there. That's the thorn, but it takes out the other thorn, which is attachment to the material world. So we're being rightly directed by Bhagavad Gita, by Srimad Bhagavatam, by Srila Prabhupada, who's teaching us how to live in such a way that although we're working, we're doing everything, we're being purified of the modes of material nature. Ekadashi Vrata, does that mean that if Maya is still disturbing us while we perform devotional service, we are not actually performing devotional service? No, it doesn't mean that. It means that you're in a particular stage of devotional service. Anartha nivritti means that you become aware of the fact that there are obstacles and you're working very hard to overcome them. And there's other verses which we've mentioned many times. I won't go into the great detail on it because we're getting late here, but Jata Shraddha Makkatasu Nirvina Sarva Karmasu Veda Dukatmakam Kamam Sprityagye Pranishvara. This verse by Krishna says that there's a stage of devotional service in which you know what the right thing is, but you can't quite do it yet. But then he says, just keep working, just keep doing it, because at a particular stage you're going to become cleared from that. Sukeshri, we can chant to control the mind. Is there practical tips how to eliminate the influence or transcend the modes of material nature on a daily basis? Yes, turn your cell phone off. And Mukaravinda Prabhu said, mid-16th century from Latin, insidious, cunning, from ambush, trick. That's the discovery of the day, don't you think? That word insidious. Anyways, so birds fly in the sky as high as they're able. And we all together today, we tried by chanting, hearing, and discussing to please Krishna.
Yes, Maharaj. There were some more comments
Okay, let's hear the comments.
on Facebook also.
Yes.
So there was a comment from Preeti Radhika, said some material activity performed for Krishna, even if it's some tinge of material desire, eventually becomes purified. This provides so much hope and encouragement. Thank you. And then Pavitra Renu says that take consistency over volume.
Yeah.
And Aditi Sharma says, I definitely need a dopamine detox.
Yeah, actually, it's really interesting. Just like tapasya, it's a wealth of the Brahmins. How can depriving your senses be a wealth? It's because you get a new insight on life. Just like if you don't eat for a while, then you start to appreciate when you do eat a lot more. If you stuff yourself all day long, food just becomes the new normal. And that's how material sense gratification works. It levels off. There's a thing in when doctors administer some drug, they have to be aware of various conditions. One of them is called tolerance, because the body seeks homeostasis, or a kind of balance. And when you introduce something new into the body, then the body adjusts to it in a certain way. So any kind of like a drug, you need more, not any kind of drug, but in certain circumstances, certain drugs, you need more and more of it in order to get the same result. So sense gratification, it doesn't mean that you're actually going to enjoy. It just means you're going to need to do more and more of it. So paradoxically, when we resist the senses and regulate them, we actually, Krishna says, raga dvesha vimuktaistu vishayan indriyaishcharan atmavashara videyatma prasadam arigachati. By following the regulations that I'm giving, Krishna says, you're going to start to enjoy a lot more than you were before, because of this prasad, this grace that comes into your life by following the process that Krishna's giving, which is not necessarily the one your senses have in mind. Anything else, Shraddha?
There are a couple of questions. I don't know if you have time to pick this up.
Let's hear what the questions are.
Well, one question is from, okay, let me just add that. Was from our Anand Vrindavan Mataji. And she's saying that it is mentioned that super soul is just the witness and the soul is the actor. But again, it's mentioned in many places that super soul guides us in various ways from within. So it's a bit confusing for me. Could you please elaborate on this?
Well, Vyasadeva says ultimately the soul is the agent, because it's what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, samaham sarvabhuteshu name dveshostina priya, that as the Paramatma, I am simply fulfilling the desires of the soul according to what it is asking for. Even so much so that at the end of the time of the universe, when we're merged back into Mahavishnu, and our mind and subtle body merges back into Prakriti, then when we come back again at the time of the next manifestation, everything gets reconstituted as it was before. Just like you see sometimes in the dry season, everything dries up. There's no frogs, there's no reeds along the side of the lake. But when the rain comes, the frogs come back and the reeds grow up again. So that happens. And then Vyasadeva points out in the Vedanta Sutra that actually the soul is an agent who can change his situation. And the logic he gives that if he wasn't an agent for change, then there would be no meaning to the Shastra, which is telling us that we should rise above the three modes of material nature. So we are agents, and Krishna responds to our desire to get out of the material world. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mam upayantite. As soon as by good fortune we decide that I would not like to stay in the material world anymore, and we start to pray to God, even if we don't know who he is, then Krishna will give us the intelligence how to come to him. A lot more to say on that, but that's the brief answer. One more?
Yeah, this is from Sriranga Puridas Prabhu. He says that suppose I'm initiated, but I couldn't follow regulative principle. For example, I trade in the share market. Does it have a karmic reaction? And how to overcome this?
You're initiated, but you're not following?
Yeah. The 4 regulative principles.
I see. Well, when the 4 regulative principles are called the regulative principles of freedom, and they free us from becoming more entangled in the material world. So when we don't follow regulative principles, it's like pouring water on a fire when trying to light it. It doesn't help us, that's for sure. So yes, there is some karmic reaction. There's a way in which if you pull the plug out of the wall when you get initiated and say, I'm not going to do this anymore, you're protected. If you plug it back in again, the fan's going to move a little bit. So, but at the same time, and if it's a mistake or an accident, or you're pushed by past bad habits into these things again, but you're sincerely trying to get out of it, then by Krishna's grace, you'll be able to overcome it at a certain point. But if you develop an attitude that it doesn't matter, then you could be in real trouble. Because the point is that maybe sometimes somebody who's not mature enough takes to the process, makes a vow for regular principles, and then somehow or other can't follow it, but they're trying. Then gradually they can pick themselves up and come to the standard over time, because the sincerity is what counts. But we shouldn't take advantage of it. If we do that, then we're committing the 7th offense. And there's also a way in which Krishna gives us a few passes, but then Bhaktivinoda Thakur gives us example that if you're really not paying attention and you don't try, it's just like if you work somewhere and then you keep showing up late, then the shopkeeper will lock you out and say, sorry, you can't work here anymore. And then after you've really thought about it, no, I really want to work, then he'll say, okay, you can come back in. So a similar way, if we really transgress, then we may have to suffer some more. So a lot of it depends on attitude.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, hey, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman.